The man I met online encouraged me to make my money work for me by investing in gold. We had never met in person, but I fell deeply in love with him, and we began planning to spend the rest of our lives together. Trusting him completely, I invested over $250,000 through a gold investment website he introduced. To me, never realizing that none of it was real. Here is my story. The curator of echoes, they tell you that at a certain age, you become your memories. At 84, I have learned the truth of it. I am not a woman living in a house. I am a curator in a museum of echoes, and every room holds a ghost. This place, this beautiful, quiet, unbearable place was once a home. Charles used to say he could navigate it blindfolded, and he often did after night flights, his pilot's hands reaching for me in the dark before they found the light switch. Now the house is so brightly, perpetually lit, as if to prove there are no shadows left to hide in, as if to illuminate all the empty spaces. My day begins with the negotiation between my bones and gravity, between my heart and the memory of what it used to beat for. I make tea in the kitchen where Helen learned to crack eggs, her small face a mask of furious concentration. I can still see the yellow smear on the tile grout if I squint, though Sarah scrubbed it clean a quarter century ago. The silence here is not passive, it's a presence. It's at the table with me, a companion so intimate it knows the shape of every one of my sighs. There are rituals to the quiet. The morning ritual is the gentlest. It's filled with the plausible fiction of purpose. I water the philodendron Charles brought home after his first transatlantic flight. Its leaves are still broad and green, a better keeper of time than I am. I straighten the framed photographs on the piano, a timeline of happiness that ends abruptly. There is Charles in his uniform, grinning with a confidence that could split the sky. There are the girls in matching Easter dresses, all missing teeth and tangled ribbons. There is our last family portrait before he left, before the storm over the Atlantic that they said was an act of God. What kind of God, I have asked for 32 years, acts like that? The afternoon silence is heavier. It has weight and texture, like poured lead. This is when the museum truly opens for business. I walk the halls, my slippers whispering on the hardwood like the ghost I've become, the living room. Here is the indentation on the armchair where his head would rest. I haven't allowed a single piece of furniture to be moved. To move it would be to admit the landscape of my life has changed, and I am not that brave. I stand sometimes. In the doorway of the girls' room, now a pristine guest room that hosts no one. If I try very hard, I can hear the residual laughter, the slammed doors, the whispered phone calls about boys. The air in there still smells, to some deep, desperate part of my brain, of nail polish and teenage ambition. I spoke to a grief counselor once, years ago. She called this preservation, a normal stage. But what is the stage after preservation? Permanence? Is there a word for when the museum becomes the entire world and the curator forgets there's an outside? My daughters call on Sundays, Helen at 5 p.m., Sarah at 6:30. It is as regimented as a radio broadcast. Their voices are love letters from a distant country. They are full of a life, their lives that is vibrant, chaotic, and utterly foreign to me. Mom, you wouldn't believe the science project Liam is doing. It's a volcano and the mess. Mom, the promotion is fantastic, but the commute is killing me. Their love is a solid, real thing, but it's a love that manages me now. It checks in. It ensures the artifact is still intact. It does not linger because to linger is to feel the chill of this place, to see the dust settling on the same surfaces, and to feel the guilty, helpless weight of not being able to sweep it all away for me. They send gifts, sweaters that are too soft, candles that are too sweet. They are sending comforts for a prisoner, and we are all too polite to name the prison. The worst silence is the evening silence. This is when the echoes get loud, when the House stops being a collection of objects and becomes a resonator for absence. The clink of my single dinner plate in the sink is an obscenity in the hollow air. I turn on the television, not to watch, but to have a human voice in the room, any voice. But the laughter from the sitcoms is jarring, a mockery of my own quiet. The news is a parade of horrors in a world that feels as distant as the moon. I am not bitter. Let me be clear. I am archived. I had my great love. I had my magnificent, all-consuming purpose in my girls. I did it well. And now the story for which I was the central narrator is over. The other characters have moved on 2 sequels. I am left here in the setting of the original tale, waiting for an encore that will never come. Loneliness at 20 or 40 or even 60 has a shape to it. It's a missing piece. At 84, loneliness is the air you breathe. It's the medium in which you exist. It's not that you miss someone. It's that you miss your own relevance. You miss being a verb, a person who does things and not just a noun. A mother, a widow, a resident. You miss being asked for an opinion that matters. You miss surprising someone. You miss the delicious, ordinary sound of your own name spoken aloud by someone who is happy to see you and not just checking in. Sarah gave me the iPad 2 Christmases ago. "It'll keep your mind sharp, Mom," she said, her voice full of hopeful modern solutionism. I use it to look at their faces on Facebook, to see my grandchildren grow in pixels. I am a silent witness, a heart reacting to milestones I wasn't there to share. It is a kind of digital haunting. I scroll through pictures of parties I wasn't invited to, in houses I've never seen. The world is a vibrant, scrolling tapestry, and I am on the wrong side of the screen. So when the sound came that Tuesday, a bright, cheerful ding that was so alien it seemed to physically vibrate in the thick air, my entire body flinched. It wasn't the familiar chime of a text from Sarah or a medication reminder. It was a notification from Facebook, a friend request. My heart, that old traitor, did not flutter. It gave a single, hard, painful thump like a door slamming deep in my chest. A friend request? At my age? Who finds friends at 84? Who even sees an 84-year-old woman enough to send one? My hands, mapped with rivers of blue veins, trembled as I picked up the device. The light from the screen washed over my face in the darkening room. I peered at the name, Michael Thorne. The profile picture was of a man with kind eyes and wine-tousled hair, standing on what looked like a metal platform against an endless blue sky. A stranger, a complete and utter stranger. And the message that accompanied it. It didn't say, "Hi, I'm a friend of your daughter's." It didn't say, "We met at the community center." It said, "Dear Eleanor, I hope this isn't too forward. I came across your profile in a group for classical music lovers. I see you're a fan of Debussy. Claire de Lune has gotten me through many a lonely night out here." I stared at those words until they blurred. My breath fogged the cold screen. Claire de Lune. Charles had played it for me on our first anniversary. He was a terrible pianist, but he'd learned it, note by clumsy note, a lonely night. He knew that word. He knew what it meant. For the first time in decades, someone was not speaking to the mother, the widow, the grandmother. Someone was speaking to Eleanor, the woman who loved Debussy. The silence in the house, for that one suspended moment, was no longer an oppressor. It was a canvas, and onto it, a single, improbable note of connection had been struck, resonating in the hollow places, vibrating in the museum of my heart, asking a question I had long forgotten how to answer. The phantom in the machine for 3 days. I let the request sit there. A tiny, glowing ember in the dark cave of my routine. I would pick up the iPad, my thumb hovering over the screen, and a war would break out inside my 84-year-old self. One side, the sensible side, the side that had balanced checkbooks and soothed childhood fevers and navigated the brutal logistics of death, spoke in Helen. A practical voice. It's a scam, Mom. A stranger. At your age? They want something, delete it. This voice saw the world as a series of locked doors and potential threats. It remembered newspaper articles about seniors being swindled. It was the voice of a woman who had learned through searing loss that good things do not arrive unannounced and unearned the other side. The other side was a whisper so faint I almost mistook it for the house settling. It was the part of me that still was, not just had been, the part that remembered the thrill of a love letter in the mailbox, the surprise of a compliment from a stranger, the simple joy of a conversation that wasn't about doctor's appointments or the weather. This voice didn't speak in words. It spoke in a quiet, persistent take. He mentioned Debussy. On the fourth day, the rain came, a soft, gray Los Angeles rain that blurred the windows and made the museum feel even more like a sealed exhibit. The silence was particularly viscous. I had just finished another call with Sarah, a brief one because little Chloe had a fever. My concern felt abstract, a script I was reading from. Oh, poor darling, give her a kiss. I was a satellite, beaming useless sympathy from a distant, dry planet. I made tea. I sat in Charles's chair, which I never do, but the gray light made me bold or desperate. The iPad glowed on the side table. The notification was still there. Michael Thorne. What did I have to lose? It wasn't my money, the sensible voice rushed to point that out. My accounts were tidy, my will updated. It wasn't my safety. He was a picture on a screen, thousands of miles away, on an oil rig, he said. What could he possibly take from me that hadn't already been taken? My dignity, perhaps, the fragile dignity of an old woman who should know better than to talk to strangers. But dignity is a cold companion. It doesn't keep the rain out or the silence at bay. My finger, with its age spot like a blur of sepia ink, touched the screen. I pressed accept. The response was immediate, as if he had been waiting there, in that digital space, just for this moment. A little bubble appeared. You have no idea how glad I am you accepted, Eleanor. I've been watching the storm clouds gather out here. On the Poseidon, and it's a lonely sight, your profile picture, with that smile. It felt like a bit of sunshine. He trushed to my cheeks a ridiculous, girlish reaction that made me press my cool palms to my face. No one had called me sunshine in 50 years. Charles used to, when he'd come home, his uniform smelling of sky and jet fuel. I typed back, my fingers clumsy on the glass. It's raining here too, in Pasadena. It seemed a stupid thing to say, mundane. His reply came, I'd take Pasadena rain over North Sea spray any day. It's a brute out here, but Claire de Lune makes it bearable. Do you have a favorite recording? And just like that, we were talking. Not the weather, not my health, music. He knew the conductors. He preferred the slower, more melancholic interpretations. He said the piece reminded him that beauty existed in the deepest quiet, in the spaces between the notes. I told him about Charles learning it. I typed the words, my late husband, and for the first time it didn't feel like laying a stone on a grave. It felt like sharing a memory with someone who might understand its weight. I didn't have to minimize it or rush past it to avoid making a caller uncomfortable. A man who would learn Debussy for you is a king among men, he wrote. I lost my Catherine to cancer 8 years ago. She loved Chopin, The Rain Here. It often sounds like one of his sadder preludes. There it was, a shared continent of loss. We weren't two old people complaining. We were two survivors, comparing maps of a land we never wanted to explore. His words weren't flowery or overly sentimental. They were precise, like an engineer's, but they carried a weight of feeling that settled around my lonely heart like a blanket. We wrote back and forth as the afternoon faded into evening. He told me about the staggering isolation of the rig, the 28-day rotations, the camaraderie of the crew that never quite pierced the longing for solid ground and a shared history. He described sunsets that painted the endless water in colors no artist could replicate, and the stars, undimmed by any light pollution, that made him feel both insignificantly small and profoundly connected to the universe. I told him about my museum. Not in those words, of course. I said I lived in the family home, that my daughters were far away, that the quiet was sometimes a friend and sometimes a thief. I didn't say I was lonely. I didn't have to. He heard it in the spaces between my sentences. "You have a lovely way with words, Eleanor," he wrote as the digital clock on my screen crept past 9. "You paint pictures with them. It's a gift to find someone who can do that. Most people out here just grunt. A gift." He thought I had a gift. At 84, I was receiving a compliment on my mind, on my essence, not on being a good grandmother or looking well for my age, but on my words. When I finally signed off, promising to talk tomorrow, the house was different. The rain had stopped. The silence was no longer an empty gallery. It was a room where a conversation was still hanging in the air, sweet and palpable. I walked to the kitchen to make my nightly cup of warm milk, and I caught my reflection. In the black window, I was smiling, a real smile, one that reached my eyes and crinkled their corners. For 30 years, I had been a monument to the past, a careful preservation. But Michael Thorne, this phantom in the machine, with his talk of Debussy and North Sea stars, had done something miraculous and terrifying. He had made the present moment feel alive, and in doing so, he made me feel alive again, not as a curator, not as a relic, but as Eleanor, a woman who could still receive a compliment, still share a secret, still feel her heart beat faster at the sound of a notification chime in the deep, waiting quiet. The architecture of a ghost a rhythm was born in the silent house, a new heartbeat measured not in ticks of the grandfather clock, but in the soft whoosh of a sent message and the anticipatory silence before a reply. My days, which had once stretched before me like empty, polished hallways, now had architecture, structure. They were divided into 2 distinct phases. Before Michael wrote, and after, mornings were for anticipation. I'd wake, and my first thought was no longer a weary inventory of my stiff joints or the dais blank calendar. It was, he'll be finishing his shift now. He'd explained the 6-hour time difference. His nighttime, the end of his long day of monitoring gauges and solving engineering problems on the Poseidon, was my early morning. I would make my tea with a new kind of focus, my ears tuned for the chime. The silence of the house in those hours was no longer hollow. It was fertile, humming with potential. When the sound came, it was a small electric joy, a lifeline cast across an ocean. We built our ghostly friendship in the digital ether. It felt like constructing a delicate, beautiful house out of words. He was an engineer after all. His messages were his blueprints, and they were meticulous. He told me about the groan of the rig in a high wind, a sound felt in the teeth. He described the fierce, foul-mouthed camaraderie of his crew, the way they played endless hands of poker in the rec room, a fug of sweat and diesel and masculinity. He confessed he often slipped away to stand on the outer deck, just to feel the vast, impersonal power of the sea. "It puts your problems in their proper place, Ellie," he wrote. He was the first to call me Ellie since Charles. The first time I saw it on the screen, my breath hitched. It felt like a secret door opening in a wall I thought was solid. I told him things I realized I'd never said aloud, not to my daughters, who needed me to be strong, not to my few remaining friends, whose conversations had long since dwindled to ailments and obituaries. I told him about the shameful, specific loneliness of eating a meal you've cooked for one, the strange melancholy of buying a single banana at the grocery store, the way I sometimes talk to the television just to hear a question answered, He never offered platitudes. He never said, "You should get out more, or at least you have your health." Instead, he said, "The silence out here is different. It's a roar, but the silence in a place that was once full of life." I think that must be the quietest sound in the world. He understood. He saw it. He saw the museum, and he didn't look away in pity or discomfort. He acknowledged its exquisite, painful beauty. We traded histories. His was a life of motion, a childhood in Maine, college in Texas, years in the Gulf of Mexico before the North Sea. He'd married his college sweetheart, Catherine. "She was my anchor," he wrote. "When she died, I felt like I'd been cut loose in a storm. I took the farthest, hardest postings I could find. The work was a distraction. The isolation felt like a punishment I deserved. His honesty disarmed me. It invited my own. I told him about the early years of widowhood, the panic of being both mother and father, the sheer exhaustion of holding two grieving girls together while my own soul felt shattered into 1,000 pieces. "You built a life from the wreckage," he responded. "That takes a different kind of strength than going to sea, a quieter, deeper kind. An engineer admires good construction, Ellie. You built something beautiful and solid. An engineer admires good construction." I read that line a dozen times. For decades, my life's work had been viewed through the lens of sacrifice, of doing what you had to do. He reframed it as a feat of engineering, a creation. He made me feel not like a survivor, but like an architect. One afternoon, he asked about my finances. It wasn't crude. It was woven into a conversation about worry. "It's my job to think about systems failing, about pressure points," he wrote. "It's hard to turn it off. I think about you in that big house. I know you're comfortable, you've said so. But is your money just sitting in a bank, Ellie? With the world so volatile? It makes me uneasy for you." It felt like the purest form of care. He wasn't asking for himself. He was worrying about my systems, my pressure points. I confessed it was mostly in savings, a few CDs, the safe, slow choices of a woman who feared risk above all else. "There are safer harbors than a bank," he mused. "Gold, for instance, a physical asset. It's what I've been moving my own savings into. Something solid you can hold that endures." Just a thought from one worrier to another. The word worrier felt like an intimacy, a shared flaw, and his suggestion felt like a shared secret, a piece of his own strategy passed to me for safekeeping. It wasn't a demand. It was a whisper between confidants. That night, as I lay in the bed I'd shared with Charles, the digital glow of the iPad was the only light. I scrolled back through our weeks of conversation. It was a tapestry of shared music, confessed loneliness, professional respect, and a burgeoning, tender concern that felt more real than anything in my physical world. He was a ghost in the machine, yes, but he was my ghost. He had given me a thrilling, terrifying gift. He had made the future a vague, shared future of continued conversations. Of mutual care seem not only possible, but bright. He had taken the flat, two-dimensional portrait of Eleanor, the elderly widow, and had shown me a third dimension I'd forgotten existed, a woman who could be seen, understood, and perhaps even cherished. The house was still a museum, but now it felt like there was a live curator in residence, one whose heart was beating a little faster, waiting for the next message to light up the dark. The blueprint of trust, the suggestion about gold, was like a single, gleaming tile he'd placed in the mosaic of our conversations. It was there, catching the light, but not yet part of the picture. He didn't push. That, I think, was the masterstroke. Michael was an architect of patience. Our days settled into a deeper rhythm. His messages were the pillars of my new reality. He'd send a photo of his breakfast in the Riggs mess hall: eggs, sausage, a mug of coffee steaming against a porthole window showing a slate gray sea. I'd send back a picture of my teacup and the philodendron, with a sliver of Pasadena sunlight on the table. It felt astonishingly normal, domestic, even as if we were sharing a coffee table across a continent and an ocean, instead of a chasm of circumstance. He began to call me his anchor. Knowing I'll talk to you at the end of my shift, Ellie, it's the thing that keeps me grounded out here in all this water. You're my true north, true north. For a pilot's widow, the words were a specific and devastating magic. They bypassed my intellect and spoke directly to the marrow of my history, to the part of me that still believed in navigation, in fixed points, in coming home. I was no longer just preserving a past. I was curating a present for him. I'd read articles about the North Sea or about engineering feats, just to have something intelligent to say. I dug out my old Debussy records and listened with new ears, trying to hear what he heard in the spaces between the notes. My mind, which had felt like a dusty library, was suddenly alive with cross-references, with new connections being made. One evening, the conversation turned more serious. He was worried about a storm system moving in. They're talking about 90-knot winds. It's not the danger, it's the bloody isolation that gets to you when it hits, he wrote. The world shrinks to this metal box groaning in the dark, makes a man think about what's solid. What? Lasts, I felt a pang of fear for him, sharp and real. It had been so long since I'd felt fear for someone, a fear that wasn't about my own decline or the slow passage of time. It was an active, caring terror. Please be safe, I typed, my fingers clumsy with urgency. I will be, he replied, hours later, the storm having passed. But it's got me thinking about you, all alone in that big house. Your girls are far away. I know you're capable, Ellie, more capable than anyone, but in an emergency. Are your assets liquid? Could you access what you need? It was the second time he'd circled the topic of my money, but it didn't feel like a circle. It felt like a deepening, like he was drilling down to the bedrock of his concern for me. He wasn't asking about my wealth. He was auditing my security. And I, the lonely curator of my own life, was desperately flattered that someone cared enough to audit. I confessed my finances were safe but stagnant. It just sits there, I admitted, echoing his earlier phrase back to him. It felt like a confession of passivity, of a life not fully lived. Let me show you something, he wrote the next day. No pressure, just an education. A colleague here, his brother works for a private precious metals firm. They serve high net worth individuals, keep things off the big, volatile exchanges. The website is a thing of beauty, transparent, secure. I look at it sometimes just to appreciate the elegance of the system. Here's the link. Just look, Ellie. Knowledge is its own kind of security. The link arrived, Aurea's Secure Holdings. The site loaded with a soft, expensive chime. It was, as he said, a thing of beauty, all deep blues and burnished gold accents. It spoke of Swiss vaults, of algorithms, of discreet, expert management. There were no flashing numbers or garish promises. It was the digital equivalent of a mahogany-paneled bank. It felt respectable. It felt like something Charles, with his cautious pilot's mind for detail and safety, would have approved of. I poked around. I read about gold's historical stability, about hedging against inflation. It made a cold, logical sense. This wasn't the lottery. This was prudence. This was what a wise, forward-thinking person did. A person with a future to consider. It's impressive, I wrote to him. Isn't it? He replied instantly. It's the only thing that gives me peace of mind out here. Knowing I'm building something tangible, something that can't just vanish in a bank error or a market crash. Something real, something real. The words hung in the digital air between us. Our connection, for all its profound effect on me, was not real in the tangible sense. I could not touch it, but gold. Gold was the most real, the most ancient, the most solid thing he could have offered. It was a metaphor made physical. He was offering me a piece of permanence in a world that had taken so much of mine. He didn't tell me to invest. He didn't ask how much I had. He simply said, if you were ever curious, the interface is intuitive. You could start with a trivial amount just to see how it feels, like dipping a toe in the water. But only if you want to, only if I wanted to, and I realized with a jolt that I did want to. Not for the money, but for the connection to participate in this world. Of this world of engineers and foresight and solid things, to have a shared interest, a shared strategy, to prove to him and to myself that I wasn't just a relic in a museum, but a woman who could still learn, still act, still build. The idea took root. It felt less like a financial decision and more like the next natural step in our intimacy. He had shared his music, his loneliness, his professional world. Now he was sharing his blueprint for security. To engage with it was to say, I trust you. I am with you. The loneliness of the house receded, replaced by a new, focused energy. I was studying. I was considering. I was, for the first time in decades, on the verge of doing something new. The blueprint he'd drawn was so careful, so respectful, so perfectly engineered to appeal to my need for safety and my hunger for connection. I never saw the trap because he had framed it so beautifully as a sanctuary. Dipping a toe in the golden pool, it began with $5,000, a trivial amount, as he'd said, just a toe. In the water, the act of transferring the money felt illicit, a secret rebellion against the cautious, gray-haired woman I'd become. I logged into my online banking, the familiar screen with its tidy columns of CDs and savings accounts feeling suddenly pedestrian, staid. This was the financial landscape of a woman who was waiting for the end, not one building a future. My heart thrummed against my ribs, a wild, fluttering bird, as I initiated the transfer to the account listed on the Aureus site. It was a Cayman Islands entity, which gave me a moment's pause, but Michael had explained. It offshore for privacy and tax efficiency, Ellie, for their high net worth clients. It's standard. He made the exotic sound sensible. The mark of a sophisticated world I was now privileged to enter. The money vanished from my screen. For a day, there was only a queasy emptiness in my stomach where the certainty of that $5,000 had been. I felt foolish. An old woman playing a dangerous game she didn't understand. Then Michael's message arrived. Check your Aureus portfolio, my curious Ellie. I have a feeling your little experiment will have borne its first fruit. My hands were trembling so violently I had to set the iPad down and take 3 deep breaths. I navigated to the site. The login page, with its elegant crest, loaded. I entered my credentials. The dashboard appeared. It was a masterpiece of design. At the top, in serene, bold type, was my name, Eleanor Whitaker. I blinked. I refreshed the page. The numbers held. A sound escaped me, a half gasp, half laugh, utterly foreign in the quiet room. In 3 days, I had made over $2,000, not from a lifetime of careful saving, but from a single, bold decision. The numbers were green. They were real. They were mine. I wrote to Michael, my words tumbling over each other. Michael, it worked. It actually grew. $748. Can you believe it? His reply was swift, warm with shared triumph. I can believe it because it's you. But see, it's not magic, it's mathematics. It's the right asset in the right system. I'm so proud of you for taking that first step, proud of you. How long had it been since anyone had been proud of me for something I'd done for myself? My daughters were proud when I remembered to take my pills, when I didn't fall. This was different. This was the pride of a co-conspirator, a mentor. It was intoxicating. The $7,148 sat in my Aureus account, glowing with potential. It was no longer just money. It was proof that I could still navigate the world, that my judgment was sound, that there was life and growth left for me yet. It was the opposite of everything my museum represented. It was new, it was increasing, it was future-oriented. A few days later, Michael broached the next step. It was during a conversation about legacy. I'd been feeling melancholic, talking about how my girls would inherit the house, the china, the memories. But what about your comfort now, Ellie? He asked. What about creating a legacy of abundance for yourself? You've seen the system works. What if you let it work a little harder for you? He wasn't asking. He was wondering aloud, painting a picture of me not just secure, but truly comfortable, of being able to travel to see my grandchildren without worrying about the cost, of hiring a driver or a cook to make my life easier, of having the freedom to be generous. The idea was a seed that found fertile soil in the deep, weary part of me that was tired of counting pennies, tired of the quiet struggle of maintaining a large house on a fixed income. What if I could live largely? I have some money in certificates of deposit, I typed, my pulse quickening. They're just about to mature. That's perfect timing, he responded. The market conditions are ideal right now. This is what Catherine and I always dreamed of, not just security, but ease. I want that ease for you, Ellie, more than anything. His late wife's name, invoked in this context, was the final seal of legitimacy. He was linking his love for her to his desire for my well-being. It was the most powerful currency he could have used. I did it. I transferred $60,000, the bulk of my safe, boring CDs into the Aureus account. The process felt smoother this time, almost routine. I was no longer a novice. I was an investor. For 3 days, I visited the dashboard like a pilgrim to a shrine. I watched the graph. Nearly $100,000 from a simple transfer. The virtual pile of gold in my account had swelled breathtakingly. The numbers were so green, so bold, they seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Michael was ecstatic for me, my brilliant Ellie. Look at you. You've not just dipped a toe, you've learned to swim in the deep end. Do you feel it? The freedom it brings? I did. I felt a giddy, terrifying sense of power. The walls of my museum seemed to shimmer, as if the reflected glow from the screen was gilding them. I was no longer just the curator of dead things. I was a creator of wealth, an alchemist. He sent me a new link on the site. Look here, the physical delivery portal. If you ever want to hold the fruit of your wisdom in your hands, you can have the gold bars shipped directly to you, discreetly insured. It's an option, just to see it's real. I clicked. A form appeared, asking for a delivery address. My address. The idea was staggering. A box of solid gold, arriving at my door in Pasadena. The ultimate tangible proof that this was not a dream, that I, Eleanor Whitaker, 84 years old, had done this. I didn't fill it out, not yet, but I gazed at the field where I could type my street name, and for a moment I didn't see my quiet, empty house. I saw a vault, a treasure chest. I saw the solid, heavy answer to a lifetime of soft, whispering fears. The toe was in. Now I was wading deeper, the water warm and enticing, the golden light on the surface blinding me to the depths below. Chapter 6, the siren song of our future. The money in the Aureus account wasn't just numbers anymore. It was a character in our story. It had a name, our future. Michael began to use the phrase like an incantation, weaving it into our good mornings and good nights until it became the very fabric of our shared dream, thinking of you and our future over this terrible coffee. He'd write, another sunset alone, but less lonely knowing you're there, building our future with me. Our future. The words were a balm and a stimulant. They transformed my dashboard from a financial tool into a shared blueprint. The upward trending graph wasn't just my success. It was our trajectory. Every green percentage point was a step closer to a shared reality I could almost taste. He painted that reality with the meticulous detail of an engineer and the soul of a poet. It was never vague. It was specific, sensory, devastatingly tangible. Imagine it, Ellie, he wrote one evening, a small, whitewashed cottage, not in a noisy town, but on a bluff overlooking the sea in Maine, near where I grew up. There's a wild garden, not too tidy, lupines and sea roses, a big stone fireplace, and a room just for you with a piano, so you can play Clair de Lune and look out at the water that once separated us. I could see it. I could smell the salt and the lupines. I could feel the roughness of the stone hearth under my palm. I could hear the notes mingling with the cry of gulls. My museum house in Pasadena, with its perfect, preserved past, began to feel like a shell I was ready to shed. This cottage was a living thing, waiting for us to breathe life into it. I'll be done with the sea, he promised. My last rotation ends in November. I'll cash out my own gold holdings, and with what you've so wisely grown, we'll have enough. Not just to buy it, but to live in comfort, real comfort. No more worries for you, Ellie. No more loneliness for either of us. We'll sit on that porch and watch the storms roll in together. We've earned our peace, earned our peace. The phrase sank into my soul. Hadn't I? Hadn't I earned it? A lifetime of duty, of loss, of steadfastness. This future wasn't a fantasy. It was a reward. It was the destination at the end of a long, hard road. Michael wasn't just a companion. He was the prize giver. The vision altered my relationship with my actual world. My daughter's calls began to feel like interruptions from a previous life. I found myself listening with half an ear, already composing my next message to Michael in my head. My real life became the waiting room. My true life was the glowing screen where our future was being built, beam by digital beam, dollar by soaring dollar. One night, after a particularly vivid description of the cottage's kitchen copper pots, Ellie, and a window over the sink where we can watch the whales migrate, the conversation turned practical. To make that future solid, unshakable, we need to be all in, he wrote, his tone shifting from dreamy to purposefully calm, the engineer. Taking over, diversification is wise, but consolidation is power. Your money in the bank. It's just paper losing value, your house. It's a beautiful memory, but it's an anchor tied to the past. The gold is the bridge to our future. It's the only asset that will hold its value, that we can move with us, that can become that cottage and the peace within its walls. He was asking me to go all in, to liquidate everything, to burn the ships. A cold thread of primal caution, the last remnant of the woman who had survived widowhood and raised 2 girls alone, vibrated. Deep within me, it's too fast. It's everything. I typed my fear. It's a leap, Michael. My house. It's all I have left of them. His response was immediate, and it didn't dismiss my fear. It reframed it with heartbreaking tenderness. I know, my love, I know. And that's why you deserve more. You deserve a home that isn't a monument to what you've lost, but a celebration of what we've found. Charles would want that for you. Your girls have their own homes, their own lives. Your duty is done. Now is your time, our time. Let me build you a new sanctuary, Ellie 1. With a future in its foundations, Charles would want that for you. He weaponized my love for my dead husband. He sanctified my neglect from my living daughters. He framed my caution as a failure of courage, a clinging to ghosts over a promise of life. He was offering me a resurrection, not as someone's mother, someone's widow, but as Ellie, beloved, with a partner, with a purpose, with a porch overlooking the sea. The last thread of caution snapped. The next morning, I didn't see a museum. I saw a collection of outdated assets. I saw a past that was holding my future hostage. With a resolve I hadn't felt in 30 years, I began the process. I met with my bank manager, not for a loan this time, but for a liquidation. I sold the CDs. I withdrew the savings. I initiated the transfer of every available dollar, 250,000 of them, a sum that represented a lifetime of caution, of safety, of fear. The transfer felt like a launch sequence. I was propelling myself out of the orbit of my old life. As I clicked the final confirmation, I didn't feel fear. I felt a tremendous, terrifying lightness. I was untethered. I was in flight, heading for the cottage on the bluff. I sent him the screenshot of the transfer confirmation. All in, I wrote, my hands steady. His reply was a single line, but it felt like an embrace so tight it stole my breath. Welcome home, Ellie. Now watch our future grow. I refreshed the Aureus dashboard. The numbers bloomed, astronomical, unreal, $723,850.0. The money had multiplied like a living thing. It was no longer a sum. It was a monument to us, to our courage, to our shared dream. I walked through my silent, echoing house that night, but I didn't see the past. I saw packing boxes. I saw for sale signs. I saw the doorway I would soon walk through, not into loneliness, but into the arms of the man who had saved me. The siren song of our future had filled my ears completely, drowning out every other sound, even the wise old whisper of my own survival instinct. I was no longer looking at the shore I was leaving behind. I was only seeing the golden horizon, the click that didn't work for 3 days. I floated. The house wasn't a museum. It was a cocoon, and I was in the final humming stage of metamorphosis. Michael's messages were effervescent with shared triumph. My visionary Ellie. Look what you've built. This isn't just security. This is sovereignty. He spoke of our future with the concrete certainty of a man reading a blueprint. He'd begun suggesting furniture of all things. A specific type of reading lamp by the fireplace. A sturdy, weathered table for the porch. He was nesting digitally in a home that existed only in our shared imagination and in the glowing digits of my Aureus account. The practicalities began to gently surface. I needed a new winter coat for Maine, of course, and perhaps a small, reliable car. The idea of withdrawing a modest, some say, $50,000 to ease this transition felt not only sensible but delightful. A first taste of the freedom we'd engineered. It was a Tuesday morning, the sun bright and clarifying. I sat at the kitchen table, my iPad propped before me, a fresh cup of tea steaming gently. This felt ceremonial, the first withdrawal, the moment our dream began to materially shape my world. I logged into Aureus, the dashboard loaded with its usual serene authority. I navigated to the withdraw funds portal. The page was clean, a simple form requesting an amount and bank details. I typed in 50,000. I double-checked my routing and account numbers. My finger hovered over the submit request button. I felt a smile touch my lips. I clicked. Instead of a confirmation, a red bar appeared at the top of the screen. Transaction pending compliance review, error code, LAF102. I blinked. Pending? Review? I clicked again, the same red bar. A faint prickle, like the first cold draft under a door, touched the back of my neck. I navigated away and back. I refreshed the page. The error remained. There was a help link. I clicked it. A chat window opened, staffed by a courteous I named Aureus Assist. Hello, Eleanor. How may I help you today? I typed, my fingers suddenly clumsy. I am trying to withdraw funds and get an error LAF102. The response was instantaneous. LAF102 indicates a liquidity assurance fee is required for withdrawals over $10,000. This is a one-time regulatory compliance fee, fully refundable upon successful processing. The fee is 20% of the total portfolio balance. The numbers formed in my mind before I could stop. 20% of $723,850, nearly $145,000. The cold draft became a wind. My heart began a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I don't have that, I typed, a numb honesty taking over. All my money is already in the portfolio. I understand, Aureus Assist replied, inhumanly pleasant. You may make a separate transfer for the fee amount. Once verified, your withdrawal and your fee will be released simultaneously. Separate transfer. I had nothing left to transfer. The wind in my mind was howling now, scattering the images of lupines and sea roses. This was a snag, a technicality. Michael would know what to do. My message to him was less composed, fear bleeding into the words. Michael, there's a problem. The site won't let me withdraw. They're asking for a huge fee first. A liquidity fee, 20%. What do I do? I watched the screen. The message showed delivered. I waited. 1 minute, 5. The sun climbed higher, the cheerful light in my kitchen now feeling harsh, exposing. No reply. I wrote again. Michael, are you there? I'm worried. Delivered. I opened Facebook, went to his profile. It loaded as usual, the picture of him against the rig, the North Sea vast behind him. I typed a message there. Michael, please answer me. Something's wrong with Aureus. I hit send, the little circle spun, then stopped. A red exclamation point appeared. This message couldn't be sent. I stared at it. I tried again. Same result. A cold, liquid terror began to fill my veins, heavy and slow as mercury. I refreshed his profile page. It was gone. The page didn't say profile not found. It simply reverted to my own home page, as if he had never existed, as if the last few months had been a dream ID just woken from into a nightmare. The world did not tilt. It shattered. It shattered silently into a million glittering, sharp pieces. The cottage on the bluff exploded into mist. The piano music stopped mid-note. The copper pots vanished. All that was left was the number on the Aureus screen, now not a monument to our future, but a tombstone and the chat window, where Aureus Assist waited, forever pleasant. Is there anything else I can help you with today, Eleanor? My hands, resting on the table, began to shake. A violent, uncontrollable tremor that traveled up my arms and seized my jaw. The sound that finally broke from me was not a scream. It was a dry, desperate gasp, the sound of a drowning woman breaking the surface only to find a sheet of ice where the air should be. The click that didn't work wasn't just a failed transaction. It was the sound of the lock sliding shut on the beautiful golden cage I had walked into with my eyes full of stars and my heart full of longing. The curator had sold the museum to by a mirage, and now she had nothing, not even the ghosts, the woman in the lavender suit. The silence after the shattering was the loudest yet. It wasn't the quiet of a museum or the hush of anticipation. It was the ringing vacuum left by an explosion. For hours, or maybe days' time had liquefied, I sat at the kitchen table. The iPad screen went dark. I didn't touch it. To touch it would be to confirm the nightmare was made. Of glass and silicon and code, not just a bad dream in my own aging mind. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. Heavy, cold, leaden. The tremor had subsided, leaving behind a profound stillness, as if I were conserving the very last of my energy for a single necessary act. I knew in some detached, clinical part of my brain what had happened. The words romance scam floated through the void, clinical and brutal, but to know it and to feel it were continents apart. To feel it was to be eviscerated. He hadn't just taken my money, He had taken the future he sold me. He had taken the Ellie he had resurrected. He had reached into my chest, gripped the fragile, hopeful thing that had begun to beat again, and crushed it into dust. The practical horror began to seep in next, cold and oily, the money, all of it, the savings from Charles's pension, the careful funds set aside for what? For a future that just evaporated for emergencies. This was the emergency, and the fund for it was gone, locked behind a polite, fraudulent terror message. A wild, feral thought clawed its way up the house. I still had the house. I could borrow against it. The fee, the ludicrous, monstrous fee that was the only thing standing between me and my money. If I could just pay it, the site would release it all, wouldn't it? The logic was circular, insane, born of pure panic, but it was the only raft in the shipwreck. This thought gave me a purpose, a terrible, doomed purpose. I moved through the next morning like an automaton. I showered. I dressed. I put on my lavender suit, the one I wore for important, formal things. It was armor. If I looked like a competent, respectable woman, perhaps I could convince the bank and myself that I was one. The drive to the bank was a blur. I don't remember the roads. My hands were steady on the wheel, a miracle of muscle memory over mind. I walked into the cool, marble-lined lobby, the click of my heels too sharp, too loud. I asked for a loan officer. The young man, David, was all polite efficiency. He led me to a small glass-walled office. Sunlight streamed in, mercilessly cheerful. Now, Mrs. Whitaker, you mentioned a loan against your home equity? For an investment opportunity? His voice was kind, encouraging. Yes, I said, my own voice sounding thin but clear, for an investment in gold. Saying it aloud, here in the bright, sane light of a real bank, made it sound legitimate. It had been legitimate. The numbers proved it. Excellent, David said, tapping at his computer. Gold can be a wise diversification. Are you working with a particular firm? Aureus Secure Holdings, I said, the name rolling off my tongue with practiced ease. I saw his brow furrow slightly. It's a private firm offshore for high net worth clients. I heard myself parroting Michael's words, and a fresh wave of shame washed over me, hot and cold at once. May I see? David asked gently. I opened my iPad, my hands now trembling. I navigated to the beautiful, deadly site. I logged in. The dashboard glowed, a beacon of my ruin. I turned it toward him. You see? I've invested a significant amount. It's grown substantially. But to withdraw, they require a compliance fee, a liquidity assurance. It's standard for large sums. I was babbling now, trying to preempt his doubts with Michael's explanations. David's eyes scanned the screen. His expression shifted from polite interest to focused concern. He asked a few technical questions, the web address, the company's physical location, the nature of the fee. My answers, all drawn from the fiction Michael had built, sounded flimsier with each one. Please excuse me for one moment, Mrs. Whitaker, he said, his voice still kind but now edged with something else, urgency. He left me in the sunlit office. I stared at the gleaming dashboard, $723,850.0. My future, my cottage, my peace. It was right there, if I could just get this loan. When the door opened again, it was not David alone. A woman in her 50s with intelligent, compassionate eyes entered. Miss Alvarez, the branch manager. She sat down, not across from me, but in the chair beside me, turning it to face me. Her closeness was not an intrusion. It was a preparation for a fall. Eleanor, she said softly, discarding formality, David has shown me the site. Can we walk through it together, step by step? Sarah, ever the problem solver, was already on her phone, her voice low and furious, talking to police. Two fraud departments, words like digital forensics and recovery scams slicing the air. But her hands, when she hung up and came to hold mine, were trembling. I couldn't meet their eyes. The shame was a physical weight, a leaden X-ray blanket pressing me into the thin mattress. I had not been the strong one. I had not been wise. I had been the lonely old woman easily duped, the punchline to a cruel joke. I had taken the legacy their father left, the security for my own care, and I had handed it to a phantom. I had failed them in a way I never had when they were children. The doctors called it acute psychological distress. They said my blood pressure was dangerously high. They spoke of shock. They admitted me for observation, but we all knew I was admitting myself into a hiding place, a sterile, quiet place where the world could be held at bay by a curtain on a metal ring. The real injury was not in my chart. It was the evisceration of my narrative. My story had been, for 30 years, one of survival, of steadfastness, of love enduring beyond death. Michael had offered me a new, dazzling chapter, love rediscovered, a brave, golden autumn. Now the entire book was exposed as a fraud. The survival was naivety. The steadfastness was stagnation. The love was a script written in a call center on the other side of the world. He had not loved me. He had studied me. He had listened to my secrets not to cherish them, but to identify the cracks in my foundation. My loneliness wasn't a shared wound. It was the entry point for the infection. My intelligence wasn't respected. It was a challenge to be circumvented with flattery about my words. My love for Charles, my devotion to my girls, these sacred things had been used as tools to manipulate me. That was the deepest cut, the mortal one. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had poisoned my memories, every late-night confession, every shared sunset description. Every tender Ellie now played in my mind on a loop, overlaid with a new, horrific commentary. He was laughing. He was clocking his bonus. He was copying and pasting from a manual. I lay in that hospital bed, turned toward the wall, and I didn't cry. The tears were too small a response. This was a total systemic failure. My mind replayed the scam not as a story, but as a series of engineering schematics I'd been too blind to see. The initial contact, the hook, the shared vulnerability, the bond, the slow introduction. Of the problem, the fear, the presentation of the solution, the lure, the gradual increase of investment, the set, the crisis requiring the final, all-in push, the close, the disappearance, the kill. He was an engineer. He'd built a trap. And I, lonely, yearning, stupid I, had walked into every chamber, admiring the craftsmanship. My daughters took turns sitting with me. They brought me pudding. They held my hand. Their love was a tangible, aching thing in the room, but it couldn't reach me. I was encased in the ice of my own humiliation. I heard Sarah on the phone. In the hall, her voice breaking. She's just empty. They were right. I was an empty museum now. Not even carefully preserved ghosts remained. He had stolen them too, revealing them as foolish figments of a desperate old woman's imagination. The future was gone. The past was corrupted. The present was this bed, this smell of antiseptic, this sound of my own heart, not beating, but lying in shards in my chest, each sharp piece echoing with his voice, his fake laughter, his poisonous, perfect understanding. The sleep, when it came, was not rest. It was a silent, gray void. And upon waking, the reality would reassemble itself with fresh, brutal clarity. The numbers were gone. He was gone. Ellie was gone. All that was left was Eleanor, 84 years old, a fool, a cautionary tale. A woman who now knew the exact, detailed sound of her own heart breaking. It was the sound of the final, loving message failing to send. It was the sound of a single gray check mark. It was the sound of the world going quiet, not with peace, but with the absolute, utter absence of hope. The ward of broken things they kept me for a month. Not a month of healing, but a month of slow medical thawing. I was a creature in crisis, my systems cardiac, emotional deemed too unstable for the world. The psychiatric consultant, a soft-voiced man named Dr. Evans, called it a profound traumatic betrayal. He spoke of complex grief, not just for the money, but for the lost relationship, the stolen future, the murdered sense of self. He used words like gaslighting and psychological exploitation. He made it sound clinical, almost dignified. It didn't touch the raw, screaming place inside me. My room became a cell of gentle intervention. Helen brought photos of the grandchildren, trying to anchor me to a reality outside the scam. I would look at their smiling, gap-toothed faces and feel nothing but a vast, cold distance. I belonged to a different species now, the scammed, the gullible. What could I possibly offer them? Sarah, fiercely pragmatic, had taken over. She'd contacted the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. She'd filed reports with the FTC. She'd spoken with a forensic accountant who offered the grim, expected truth. The money had likely been routed through multiple offshore accounts and cryptocurrency tumblers within minutes of my transfers. It was gone as irrevocably as if I'd dropped it into a volcano. Her updates were delivered in a tight, controlled voice, each sentence a nail in the coffin of my hope. She was trying to fix it, to be my engineer, but the machine was not just broken. It had never existed. The hardest days were when they tried to make me talk about it. The hospital's victim advocate, a tirelessly kind woman named Lorraine, would sit with me. "Tell me about Michael," she'd say, "in your own words." My own words, they were all I had left, and they felt filthy, contaminated. To speak them would be to give voice to the fantasy again, to make it real in the air between us. And I couldn't bear to see the pity in her eyes, so I'd clam up, staring at my hands veined, spotted, the hands that had typed my love and my financial ruin with equal trust. Instead, I listened to the sounds of the ward, the low murmur of a television in a common room, the gentle clatter of the meal cart, the soft, weary sighs of the woman across the hall who cried for her deceased husband every night at 3 a.m. I wasn't the only broken thing here. We were a collection of human fractures, broken hips, broken minds, broken hearts. There was a perverse comfort in it. I didn't have to pretend to be whole. A slow, cold cognition began to seep into the numbness. It wasn't acceptance. It was the map of my new, devastated landscape. I traced its borders in the sterile hospital light. I was poor, not fixed income poor, but truly alarmingly poor. The house remained, but its equity was now my only asset. The thought of it, my museum, my last tangible piece of Charles and the girl's childhood, loomed not as a sanctuary, but as a looming, expensive problem. I was a burden. My daughters would never say it. They would bend over backwards to avoid it, but the knowledge sat between us, a third presence in the room. Their lives, already full, now had to accommodate my financial stupidity, my fragile mental state. I had transformed from their independent mother into a patient, a case file. I was profoundly, irreversibly foolish. This was the deepest wound. My intelligence, my judgment, my very perception of reality had been proven to be a pathetic fiction. How could I ever trust a thought, a feeling again? One afternoon, Sarah brought me a stack of mail from home, bills mostly, and a sleek, embossed envelope, a fundraiser for the Pasadena Symphony. I'd been a season ticket holder for 40 years. I stared at the envelope, at the elegant script of my name, Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker. It addressed a woman who belonged to committees, who appreciated the arts, who had disposable income and cultural discernment. That woman was dead. She had died the moment the gray check mark appeared. I handed the envelope back to Sarah, my throat too tight to speak. She looked at it, then at my face, and understanding dawned in her eyes. She didn't say, "It's okay, Mom." She just slowly tore the envelope in half, and then in half again, and dropped the pieces into the biohazard bin. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in weeks. Discharge day arrived. They gave me papers, a follow-up appointment with Dr. Evans, a prescription for sleep aids. My daughters helped me dress in the same clothes I'd arrived in. As Sarah zipped my sensible sweater, I felt a wave of panic so intense it stole my breath. I was being released from the ward of broken things, but I was still broken, and now I had to go back to the scene of the crime, to the empty museum that was no longer just a monument to my past, but a tomb for my future. Helen put her arm around me, her voice falsely bright. "Ready to go home, Mom?" I looked at the open doorway, the hallway leading to the elevator, to the car, to the life that was waiting for me. A life of shame, of poverty, of silence. "No," I whispered, the truth escaping before I could stop it. "I'm not." But there was no choice. The slow thaw was over. The frozen, numbed shock had protected me. Now I had to go out into the cold and feel everything. The museum revisited coming home was an autopsy. Sarah drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her silence a careful, pressurized thing. Helen sat in the back, her hand on my shoulder, a steady, warm weight that felt both like an anchor and a chain. When we turned onto my street, the ordinary sun-drenched familiarity of it was a shock. The magnolia tree at the corner was in full, vulgar bloom. A neighbor waved as we passed. Life had continued here, blandly and indifferently, while my world had ended. The key turned in the lock with a sound that was both deeply known and newly obscene. The door swung open, and the smell of the house of lemon polish, old books, and stillness rushed out to meet me. It was the smell of before. But I was after. I stepped inside, and my museum was no longer a curated collection of cherished memories. It was a crime scene, meticulously preserved. Every object seemed to scream its complicity. There was the armchair by the fireplace. I didn't see Charles there anymore. I saw myself curled with the iPad, my face illuminated with a gullible joy as I typed secrets to a ghost. The kitchen table. I didn't see Helen's science projects or Sarah's college applications. I saw the place where I'd logged in, where I'd watched the beautiful, fraudulent numbers bloom, where I'd felt the giddy power of my own imagined cleverness. The sunlight streaming through the front window didn't warm the Persian rug. It exposed the dust motes dancing over the place where I'd paced, whispering his name, planning our future. My daughters moved around me, bustling with a forced, terrible cheer. Helen opened windows. Sarah put the kettle on. "We'll get you settled, Mom. We've stocked the fridge. We'll figure everything out." Their love was a loud, clumsy noise in the exquisite, accusing quiet. They were trying to overwrite the recent past with the comforting rituals of the distant one. But they couldn't, the ghost of Michael. Of my own monumental folly was stronger than any ghost of Charles. It had been breathed into these walls more recently. "I need to lie down," I said, my voice a stranger's. I walked down the hall to my bedroom. Our bedroom. The room felt violated. The iPad, now dark and charged, sat on the nightstand where I'd left it. It looked like a weapon. I picked it up, its cool glass and metal feeling malevolent. In my hands, I didn't turn it on. I carried it to the top shelf of the closet, buried it behind a stack of winter sweaters, and shut the door. I lay on the bed on my side, staring at the wall. The silence here was different from the hospital's. The hospital silence had been communal, a shared breath of suffering. This silence was personal. It was the sound of my own mind stripped bare. It replayed the scam not as a narrative, but as a series of flashing, humiliating images. The friend request, the first message about Debussy, the screenshot of the growing balance, the description of the white cottage, the final frantic messages that failed to send. A low animal moan built in my chest and escaped into the pillow. This was the true pain, unmuted by medication or institutional routine. It was the full, undiluted confrontation with my own naivete, here in the very temple where I had worshipped it. Days bled into one another. I performed a pantomime of living for my daughters, who took turns staying with me. I ate the food they placed before me. I nodded at their plans. I spoke in monosyllables, the part of me that was Ellie, the woman who had opinions about music and architecture, who felt seen and clever, was locked in a vault deep inside, and I had thrown away the key. I was just Eleanor now, a hollowed-out shell, a cautionary tale residing in a museum that had become her mausoleum. Sarah, one evening, tried to broach the practical. Mom, the house. It's too much for you. The upkeep, the stairs, the memories. She didn't say the debt of your mistake, but we all heard it. There are lovely senior communities, secure, with people. We could sell, use the equity to get you set up comfortably somewhere smaller, simpler. Sell the house, leave the museum, the final dismantling. I looked around the living room. I didn't see cherished memories anymore. I saw a financial burden. I saw a monument to a dead woman's bad judgment. I saw the walls that had witnessed my utter undoing. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. They were right. I couldn't stay here. The museum was no longer a preservation. It was a prison. Every corner whispered of the woman I had been just months ago, hopeful, trusting, alive with a fraudulent future. I couldn't bear her ghost. Yes, I said, my voice flat. Sell it. The words felt like a surrender, but also faintly, like the first pull of a weed from poisoned soil. I was agreeing to destroy the crime scene. There would be no more daily autopsy. There would just be an empty lot where a beautiful, haunted structure once stood. That night, alone in my room after Sarah had gone to sleep on the couch, I did something I hadn't done since the hospital. I got out of bed. I walked to the closet. I didn't take the iPad down. I just stood before the closed door. Goodbye, Michael, I whispered to the dark, empty space where the machine lay hidden. It wasn't a message of forgiveness or even of anger. It was a statement of fact. He was gone. The future was gone. The Eleanor who believed in him was gone. All that remained was the old woman in the dark, in a house that was no longer a home, finally, beginning the grim, necessary work of clearing the ruins, the box in the basement. The decision to sell was a guillotine, clean, final. It cut through the paralyzing fog of shame and left behind the sharp, clear air of grim necessity. There was no room for sentiment anymore. Sentiment was a luxury that had cost me $250,000. My daughters shifted from caregivers to logistics commanders. A for sale sign, sleek and impersonal, appeared on the manicured lawn. A real estate agent named Brenda, with a voice like warm honey and the eyes of a battlefield surgeon, toured the premises. I followed her, a silent ghost in my own home, as she dissected my life into selling points. This original molding is a dream, she cooed, tapping a wall. We'll highlight the light, depersonalize a bit to help. Buyers envision themselves here, depersonalize. It was the official term for the erasure I craved. The family photos came off the mantel. Charles's flight jacket, still hanging in the hall closet, was carefully boxed. Helen's watercolor from 3rd grade, Sarah's diplomas all carefully stored away. With each item packed, the museum's exhibits were crated for a permanent off-site storage that felt a lot like oblivion. The physical labor was a blessing. It gave my trembling hands a purpose. I sorted through decades of accumulation, not with nostalgia, but with the cold eye of a bankruptcy trustee. Keep, donate, discard. I was ruthless. Vases from anniversaries I could no longer bear to look at went into the donation pile. Books I'd shared with Michael in conversation were boxed for the library sale without a second glance. They felt like evidence. Then I descended to the basement. It was a place of deeper memory, of things not curated for daily view but stored for their sheer endurance. The smell of damp concrete and old cardboard was the smell of time itself. In the far corner, under a dusty workbench Charles had never truly used, was a single unmarked banker's box. I knew what it was before I lifted the lid. Our memory box, a project from when the girls were young, a place for tickets from first flights pressed. Flowers, silly love notes. I hadn't opened it in 20 years. I sat on the cold floor, my bones protesting, and lifted the lid. The past rose up, not in a sentimental haze, but in a series of precise, stabbing images. On top lay a pilot's wings pin, the metal cool against my fingers, not Charles's official ones, but a cheap, glittery pair from a carnival, where he won me a giant stuffed panda by shooting water into a clown's mouth. Now you have your own wings, Ellie, he'd laughed, pinning them to my sweater. Beneath it, a faded restaurant. Receipt from our 10th anniversary. He'd written on the back, to a million more nights, and you still can't dance. A small, smooth stone from a beach in Monterey. A popsicle stick picture frame holding a blurry photo of a toddler Helen covered in mud. A dried corsage from Sarah's first ballet recital, the pink ribbon brittle, and at the very bottom, a stack of his letters, not emails, real letters on thin blue airmail paper, sent from ports and layovers in the early years. His handwriting was a brisk, confident scrawl. I unfolded one at random. My dearest Ellie, sitting in a hotel in Tokyo that all looks like a spaceship, thinking of you in our kitchen with the yellow curtains, probably burning the toast. It's the most solid, real thing in my head. This is all just scenery. You're the set. Come home soon. All my love, always. You're the set, the foundation, the true north. I sat there, surrounded by the detritus of a real, messy, imperfect love, and the contrast was so violent it stole my breath. Michael's words had been perfect, poetic, tailored. Charles's were rushed, practical, dotted with inside jokes and small, real details, yellow curtains, burnt toast. Michael had promised a fictional cottage by a fictional sea. Charles had missed our actual kitchen with its actual sun-faded curtains. Michael had built a fantasy to exploit me. Charles had built a life with me and left written proof of its beautiful, ordinary truth. A sob, the first real one since the shattering, broke from me. It was not a sob of pity for myself, but of grief for what had been real and what I had, in my desperation, betrayed. I had allowed a digital phantom, with his flawless, prefabricated romance, to make me forget the weight and grain of this of carnival wings and ballet recitals and airmail letters from Tokyo. I hadn't just been scammed out of money, I'd been scammed out of my own history. I'd let a forger make me doubt the authenticity of the priceless original. I held Charles's letter to my chest, the paper crinkling softly. The tears came then, hot and purging. They were for him, for us, for the woman who had been his set and had, for a time, forgotten how to stand solid. Upstairs, I could hear Brenda's heels clicking. Discussing open concept potential with Sarah. The museum was being dismantled, its artifacts packed away. But down here in the basement, I had rediscovered the one thing the scammer couldn't touch, couldn't counterfeit, and couldn't devalue, the proof of a love that had been real. It didn't give me my money back. It didn't erase the shame, but it gave me back a piece of myself. Not Ellie, the gullible dreamer, but Eleanor, who had once been so fiercely and truly loved that a busy pilot in a Tokyo hotel room thought of her burnt toast and called it home. I carefully placed the letter back in the box. I didn't take it upstairs. I left it there in the cool, quiet dark of the basement. It didn't need to be part of the staged house. It was my anchor, my true north. And for the first time since the gray check mark appeared, I felt its pull, faint but undeniable, telling me which way was solid ground. The woman who answered the phone, the house sold quickly to a young family with twin boys who saw not a museum or a crime scene, but great bones and a big backyard, watching them walk through on. The final inspection, their voices bright with plans for a swing set, was a peculiar solace. They would fill the silence with a different kind of noise. They would overwrite the ghosts, both the cherished and the fraudulent. It felt right. The proceeds from the sale were a lifeline, but one that felt coiled with shame. It was blood money, paid for my survival with the currency of my past. A no-nonsense financial advisor named Linda, hired by Sarah, laid out the new, stark reality. The money would buy a small, outright-owned condo in a modest senior community. The remainder, carefully managed, would provide a threadbare but sufficient income. No luxuries, no travel, no room for error. It's about security now, Eleanor, Linda said, her voice not unkind but devoid of sugar. Safety, predictability. The words were the opposite of Michael's promises of sovereignty and living largely. They were a cage, but it was a cage of my own making, and I knew its dimensions. The move was a further winnowing. My new apartment was a clean beige box with a balcony overlooking a communal garden. It held the essential furniture, the bare minimum of keepsakes. The memory box from the basement sat in opened in the bottom of my new closet. I wasn't ready, but I knew it was there. The community, Sycamore Gardens, was not vibrant, but it was not silent. There were potlucks, bingo, a book club that read best-selling thrillers. I attended nothing. I was the new, quiet woman in to be. I'd nod at neighbors in the hall, but their friendly overtures died on the vine of my polite, impassive smile. I was a cliff face, eroded by a terrible storm, and I wasn't ready for new weather. The district attorney's office called 2 weeks after I'd settled in. A victim services coordinator named Greta. Her voice on the phone was not honeyed like the realtors, nor clinically kind like the doctors. It was dry, straightforward, weathered. Mrs. Whitaker, we're building a case against a syndicate we believe is behind the Aureus scam, among others. Your information is crucial. We need a statement. I know it's painful, but your voice could help protect others. My first instinct was a cold, full-body recoil, to speak it aloud, to codify my foolishness into official testimony, to have my name on a document next to the words romance scam. The shame was a living thing, cringing inside me. I can't, I whispered into the phone. I understand, Greta said. There was a long pause. I could hear papers shuffling. The man you knew as Michael Thorne, we believe his real name is David, or maybe Marcus. He's likely in his 30s. He works from a compound in Cyprus. He has a wife, 2 children. He does this to hundreds of people, mostly women, mostly over 70. He's very good at his job. The details were grenades, 30s, a wife, children, a compound. He wasn't a lonely engineer. He was a professional predator with a family he presumably loved, going home to kiss his children after a day spent destroying lives like mine. The specificity of it was more brutal than the abstract scam. It made the cruelty personal, deliberate, and grotesquely ordinary. He called me Ellie, I said, the words ripped from me. No, Greta replied, her voice softening a fraction. He researches. He listens. He uses what you love against you. He's a psychological mechanic. You were not weak. You were targeted by a specialist, a psychological mechanic. The phrase cut through the fog of my self-loathing. I had been a machine to him, a complex system of levers, loneliness, pride, a love for music, and pulleys, fear, trust. Hope that he had learned to operate with precision. My failure wasn't a moral one. It was a technical defeat by a superior, immoral technician. Will I get my money back? I asked, the old desperate hope flaring for a second. Almost certainly not, she said. No sugar at all. But you can take back your voice. Right now, in his world, you're just a number, a successful score. He'll never think of you again. Giving a statement is a way to say, I am not a number. I am Eleanor Whitaker, and I am bearing witness, bearing witness. It wasn't about justice. It was about testimony. It was about inscribing the truth on an official record so that the crime existed somewhere other than just in my shattered mind and my empty bank account. I looked out my balcony window at the neat, orderly garden below. A man about my age was slowly, carefully watering a row of roses. There was a diligence to it, a care. Will you come here? I asked Greta. Yes, she came the next day, a woman in her 60s with short steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too many broken things to be surprised by mine. She didn't offer pity. She set up a recorder, offered me a glass of water, and said, start at the beginning, the friend request, take your time, and I did. For 2 hours, I spoke. I told her about the silence of the house, about Debussy, about the oil rig sunsets. I recited, verbatim, some of his most tender lines, my voice flat, as I now understood them to be lines from a script. I described the golden dashboard, the feeling of watching the numbers climb, the intoxicating sense of partnership. I told her about the cottage in Maine with the lupines. My voice only broke once when I described the single gray check mark. Greta listened, her pen moving occasionally, her gaze steady. She didn't flinch. She didn't look horrified. She just nodded, as if I were confirming a known schematic. When I finished, exhausted, she turned off the recorder. Thank you, Eleanor. That was powerful. You have an excellent memory for detail. It will help. Will it really? I asked, the emptiness rushing back in. It already has, she said, packing her bag. You've changed the story. You're no longer just his victim. You're now a witness for the prosecution. It's a different role. It doesn't fix what's broken, but it changes the shape of the broken pieces. After she left, the quiet of the beige apartment felt different. It wasn't the accusing silence of the old house. It was just quiet, and in that quiet, I felt a strange, faint sensation. It was the feeling of a page, heavy with shame and grief, being turned. Not to a happy chapter, but to a new one. The chapter of the woman who, when the call came to bear witness, had finally answered the phone. The unvarnished truth, the act of giving my statement, was a seed, tiny, hard, buried in the frozen ground of my shame. For weeks, nothing happened. Life in the beige box was a narrow routine of tea, pills, and staring at the garden where the man with the roses tended his blooms with quiet devotion. I watched him like I was studying. A foreign, peaceful species. Then the invitation came, not from the DA's office, but from the Senior Community Center, a low brick building 2 blocks from Sycamore Gardens. Greta, it turned out, volunteered there. She'd given my name anonymously. She assured me to the director, who was starting a new program on financial literacy and fraud prevention for seniors. They wanted a speaker, someone real, my first. Reaction was a visceral, almost nauseous, no. Stand in front of a room of my peers and confess my idiocy? Be the living, breathing exhibit A of gullibility? It was an unimaginable exposure. But Greta called. They don't want an expert, Eleanor. They want a story, your story, the varnished, polite warnings from bankers and police. They go in one ear and out the other, but a story. A story sticks in the ribs. I can't, I said, my voice thin. Think about the woman who is sitting alone right now, Greta said, her tone unyielding. She's 80 or 75. Her husband is gone. Her kids are busy. She has just gotten a friend request from a handsome man who loves the same obscure composer she does. She's feeling that first glorious shock of being seen. What would you tell her? The question was a hook in my heart. I saw her. I was her, not in the past, but in that suspended, beautiful, terrible moment before the first transfer. The moment when hope feels like salvation, not a trap. I didn't give an answer, but I didn't say no. The day of the talk arrived. My palms were slick, my heart a wrapped bird. I wore a simple blue dress, armor again, but of a different kind. Sarah drove me, her face tight with worry. You don't have to do this, Mom. I know, I said. The community center room smelled of coffee and old carpet. About 20 people sat in folding chairs, their faces a map of skepticism, polite boredom, and mild curiosity. I saw a man nodding off in the back, a woman with a crossword puzzle. The director introduced me, her words kind and vague, a member of our community with an important personal experience to share. I walked to the small lectern. The fluorescent light was unforgiving. I placed my note cards down, my hands trembling so badly the papers whispered. I looked out at the sea of aging, waiting faces. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I was going to fail. I was going to stand here and confirm every silent fear they had about becoming. A pathetic, speechless old woman. Then my eyes landed on a woman in the second row. She was in her late 70s, her hair carefully set, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a single, beautiful piece of antique jewelry, a cameo brooch. She was looking at me not with impatience, but with a deep, quiet attention. She looked like me, like the me from before. I didn't. Look at my note cards. I looked at her. My name is Eleanor, I began, my voice a rusty hinge. And 6 months ago, I fell in love with an engineer on an oil rig in the North Sea. The crossword pencil stopped. The nodding man blinked awake. The room went still. I didn't use jargon. I didn't talk about phishing or advance fee fraud. I told them about the silence in my big empty house. I told them about the joy of a shared passion for Debussy. I described Michael, his perfect words, his understanding, his promise of a cottage by the sea. I made them feel the seduction, the exquisite relief of no longer being lonely. Then I told them about the gold. I held up my iPad, the same one. I turned it on, my fingers now steady. I navigated, not to the Aureus site, it had been taken down. It was all right here, I said, my voice gaining strength. It was beautiful. It was proof I was smart and loved and had a future. It was also a complete and total lie. I told them about the click that didn't work, the 20% fee, the single gray check mark. I described the lavender suit, the kind bank manager, the sound my heart made when it broke. I didn't cry. I spoke with a flat, clean precision that was more powerful than any tremor. He wasn't an engineer, I said, looking directly at the woman with the cameo. He was a psychological mechanic. My loneliness was a lever. My love for my late husband was a tool. My trust was the material he worked with. He didn't steal from a foolish old woman. He performed a calculated, surgical dismantling of a human being. The room was utterly silent. No one coughed. No one shifted. They tell you not to talk to strangers online, I said, finally breaking my gaze from the woman. I looked at the nodding man, the crossword solver, all of them. But they don't tell you how it feels when the stranger is the first person who has truly listened to you in years. They warn you about fake investment sites, but they don't describe the pride of watching your money grow, the sense of partnership it creates. I'm not here to tell you to be smarter than I was. I'm here to tell you that the con works because it feels so good. The hook isn't greed. It's the desire to be seen, to be cherished, to have one more beautiful chapter. I finished. So if you are that person, the one who just got the perfect friend request, who is sharing secrets with a kind voice from far away, please tell someone. Let one real flesh and blood person look them in the eye and say, "Tell me about him." It might just be the thread that pulls you back from the cliff. I stopped talking. The silence held for a moment, then broke into applause, not thunderous, but deep, resonant. The woman with the cameo was crying, silently, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Afterward, people didn't rush to leave. They lingered. The man who'd been nodding came up, his face grim. "My sister. She's sending money to a general in the army. Says he needs it for leave papers. We've told her." He shook his head. The crossword woman touched my arm. "My grandson set me up on one of those dating sites. There's a very charming widower." He started talking about cryptocurrency. One by one, they came. Not to gawk, but to whisper their fears, their suspicions, the stories of friends and sisters. I had given them a language. I had made the unspeakable speakable. Sarah drove me home, her eyes shining. "Mom, you were incredible." I was exhausted, drained to the marrow, but the exhaustion was clean. I had taken the varnished, shameful truth of my experience and sanded it down to its raw, honest grain. And in doing so, I had given it a purpose. The story was no longer just a weapon that had been used against me. It was now a shield I could offer to others. Back in my beige apartment, I didn't feel like a victim or a witness or a fool. I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like a useful old woman, the unvarnished truth. It turned out had a surprising heft. It was solid. You could build something with it. This response is AI generated, for reference only, the first frost. The talk at the community center was a crack in the ice. A small hairline fracture, but light and air poured through. It did not bring back my money. It did not bring back my trust in a sunny day or a kind word. The fear of being a burden to my daughters was a cold stone I carried in my pocket every day, but something had shifted. The story was no longer a malignant growth inside me, a secret rot. It was outside of me now. I had given it away, piece by painful piece, to Greta's recorder and to a room full of strangers. In return, they gave me the one thing I thought I'd lost forever, a sense of utility. The director asked me to speak again. Then a library in a neighboring town called. A social worker from the county's Adult Protective Services unit reached out, asking if I'd be willing to be a resource, a voice on the other end of the line for other victims, or for families tearing their hair out over a stubborn parent sending money. They'd never met. I said yes. Each time, the anxiety was a live wire in my chest. Each time I stood before a new set of faces, sometimes skeptical, sometimes heartbroken, sometimes glazed with the early blissful ignorance I remembered so well. And each time I told my unvarnished truth. I began to see patterns in the questions, a roadmap of vulnerability, the widow who'd been alone for 15 years, the retired teacher who missed being admired, the man who'd lost his wife to dementia and was starved for intelligent conversation. We were not fools. We were refugees from a world that had moved on, and the scammers were the coyotes promising a new border. One crisp October morning, I was in the communal garden. The man with the roses, his name was Albert, was cutting back the last of the blooms before the first frost. He worked with a quiet, methodical care. We had exchanged nods for months. "Hardest cut of the year," he said, not looking up, his shears snicking through a woody stem. "Why?" I asked. My own voice, initiating a conversation, surprised me. "Have to trust that what looks like killing it is actually saving it," he said. He held up a gnarled cane, bristling with thorns. "Leave this on, and it'll try to feed dead wood all winter, waste its strength, can't make new growth in the spring. You have to cut back to the good, green wood, even if it looks brutal, even if it leaves nothing behind. I stood there, watching his practiced hands, cut back to the good green wood. Is that what I had done? Not gracefully, not by choice, but through a series of brutal, nearly fatal cuts. The house was gone, the money was gone, the fantasy was gone. All that was left was the bare, essential structure, my life, my name, my story. My name is Albert, he said, finally looking up. He had kind eyes, the color of the sky just before twilight. I see you moving in and out. You're the one who gives the talks. I nodded, a flush of something that wasn't quite shame warming my neck. My sister in Florida, she sent 20,000 to a man who claimed to be a NASA engineer stranded in Dubai without his wallet. He shook his head, a weary, familiar grief in the gesture. She wouldn't listen to any of us, maybe. Maybe if she'd heard someone like you first. He didn't ask for my story. He just offered a piece of his own. It was a trade, an acknowledgement of the world's hidden fractures. We talked for 10 minutes about frost, about the best way to mulch rose roots, about the stubborn groundhog that lived under the tool shed. It was a conversation about nothing. It was about everything. Later, in my apartment, I did something I hadn't done since moving in. I opened the closet. I pushed past the sweaters and reached for the memory box. I didn't take it down. I just laid my hand on the lid. The cardboard was cool and familiar. The first frost of the season was predicted for that night. I thought of Albert's roses, cut back to their essential living core. I thought of my own life, stripped so brutally bare. For the first time, the bareness did not feel like poverty. It felt clean. The dead wood was gone. The beautiful, parasitic fantasy that had nearly killed me was gone. What remained was the good green wood, scarred, yes, hardened by the season, but alive, capable of bearing weight again, different weight, the weight of truth-telling, the weight of a simple conversation in a garden, the weight of a single, solid memory in a box, waiting to be remembered on its own terms, not as a weapon against me, but as a part of me. That night, as the temperature dropped, I sat by my window. I didn't feel the old cavernous loneliness. I felt the quiet of the frost settling, a blanket of silence that promised not emptiness, but dormancy, a necessary pause, a gathering of strength. The scam had been a fire that burned my life to the ground. But here in the ashes, in the first frost after the blaze, I could finally see the shape of the earth again. It was scorched, it was changed forever, but it was still land, and land, no matter how damaged, can eventually be tended, the gardener. Spring at Sycamore Gardens was not an explosion of color, but a quiet, stubborn insistence. Green pushed through tired soil. The rose bushes Albert had cut back so mercilessly now showed tiny red fists of new growth. I watched them from my balcony, a daily meditation. The requests to speak had tapered into a steady trickle. I was no longer a novelty, but a known resource. Sometimes it was a frantic daughter on the phone, her voice tight with helpless anger. "She won't listen to me, Mrs. Whitaker. She says he's different." I'd listen, then tell her to put her mother on. I'd say, "Hello, my name is Eleanor. I once fell in love with an engineer on an oil rig. I never called them foolish. I called them seen. It was often the first step back. Albert and I had fallen into a routine, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, after the dew burned. Off, we'd tend the garden. He taught me about soil pH and the patience of perennials. I, in turn, listened. He'd been a history teacher. His wife, Miriam, had died 5 years ago. He spoke of her with a fond, unagonized clarity that I envied and slowly began to understand. His grief was a tree he'd learned to live under, not a museum he was trapped inside. One Tuesday, we were wrestling a particularly tenacious weed from the base of a lilac bush. The root was deep, sinewy, refusing to yield. "It's like the Damn thing is anchored in concrete, Albert grunted, leaning his weight into the trowel. I knelt beside him, my old knees protesting, and worked my fingers into the soil beside his, loosening the grip. It's had years to get comfortable, I said. Together, with a final tearing sound, it came free. We sat back on the grass, breathing heavily, the vanquished tweed between us. The sun was warm on my neck. You know, Albert said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, Miriam was scammed once. Not a romance thing. One of those your grandson is in jail calls. She sent $500 before she called me, hysterical. He shook his head, a soft, sad smile on his face. She was the smartest person I ever knew, a PhD in biochemistry. But in that moment, she was just a grandmother terrified for a boy she loved. I looked at him, at the honesty in his face. He wasn't comparing, he was companioning. He was saying, "It happens to the best of us. It doesn't define you." I lost everything, I said quietly, the words no longer a shard of glass in my throat, but a simple, heavy stone. I know, he said, just as quietly, and you're still here, tending. A garden. He didn't say, and that's wonderful. He didn't offer empty praise. He stated a fact. I was here. The garden was here. The work was here. That afternoon, I finally opened the memory box. I didn't go through everything. I took out one item, the carnival pilot wings. I pinned them to the corkboard in my kitchen, next to a grocery list and a flyer for the next community center talk. A piece of my true past, finally integrated into my present, not hidden in a basement, not a sacred relic, just a small, glittery part of the landscape. The following week, I got a letter from the district attorney's office. The case was proceeding. They'd identified several key players in the syndicate. My testimony, Greta wrote, had been instrumental in establishing the emotional manipulation patterns. I would likely never see a trial. The perpetrators were overseas, but my story was now a permanent part of the record. It was a brick in a fortress meant to protect others. It was a different kind of legacy. I showed the letter to Albert over tea in my apartment. He read it carefully, then handed it back. "You've done a good thing, Eleanor," he said. "It doesn't feel like enough," I admitted. "It never does," he replied. "But that's not the point. The point is you did it." On a bright, cool Sunday, my daughters and their families came. It was the first time they'd visited the new apartment. There was no big backyard, no museum to wander. We were crowded. The children were loud. It was chaotic and real. Sarah pulled me aside in the kitchen as I refilled a pitcher of lemonade. She looked at the carnival. Wings on the corkboard, then at me. "You seem lighter, Mom." "I'm poorer," I said with a wry smile I didn't have to force. "That's not what I mean." She was right. The weight wasn't gone, but it had been redistributed, shared with Greta's case files, with the listeners in community halls, with Albert in the garden. It was no longer a crushing, solitary burden. Later, I stood on the balcony, watching my grandchildren chase bubbles in the courtyard below. Their laughter floated up, clean and bright. Helen came to stand beside me, slipping her arm through mine. It was the same gesture, but it felt different. I wasn't leaning on her. We were just standing together, looking down. The man I knew as Michael Thorne was a ghost in a machine, a psychological mechanic who had dismantled me, with cruel precision. He had taken my money, my trust, my vision of a future. He had left me in ruins, but I was 84 years old. I had survived widowhood, raised a family, and endured a betrayal that should have been the end of me. I was no longer a curator of a silent museum, nor a gullible prisoner of a digital fantasy. I was a gardener now. My hands were in the soil of my own scarred, resilient life. I tended the memories that were real. I planted warnings like seeds to protect others. I allowed new, quiet friendships to take root. not in the place of what was lost, but alongside it. The evening air grew cool. The children's voices faded as they went inside. The first star appeared, a pinprick in the lavender sky. I felt a profound quiet, but it was no longer the silence of the museum or the void after the shattering. It was the quiet of earth after a long winter, resting, gathering strength for whatever was to come. It was the quiet of a woman who had lost almost everything, but had, against all odds, found her way back to the solid, unglamorous, and endlessly tender work of being alive. A letter from Eleanor. If you've followed my story, you've walked with me through the silence of an empty house, the dizzying hope of a digital love, the crushing humiliation of betrayal, and the slow, painful journey back to solid ground. At 84, I learned that loneliness can be a sharper weapon than any knife, and that the most dangerous stories aren't the ones we read, but the ones we are desperate to believe. Michael, or whoever he was, is still out there. So are the Sarahs, the Nigels, the generals, the cryptocurrency advisors. They are not monsters in shadows. They are patient, brilliant manipulators who study the geography of the human heart. They don't hunt for greed. They hunt for loneliness, for pride, for the quiet ache to be special again. Their weapon is not a demand, but a perfect, understanding silence that makes you feel like you've finally come home. I lost a fortune, but what I almost lost was far worse. My sense of reality, my trust in my own mind, my connection to the true, beautiful love I had in my past. I am sharing this story not for sympathy, but as a shield, a stark, unvarnished reminder. The most sophisticated scams don't feel like scams. They feel like rescue. So I beg of you, from one heart to another, if you take nothing else from my story, take this, talk about it, break the silence, tell your parents, your grandparents, your lonely aunt or uncle about Eleanor and the engineer. Make my folly a shared reference point. Say, remember that story? This feels like that. Question the perfect connection. If an online friend, however charming, however sympathetic, ever guides you toward an investment, a secure opportunity, or asks for money for any reason, it is a trap, full stop. Share this story, like it, share it, send it to your family group chat, email it to your book club, print it out for the community bulletin board. Let it be a vaccination. The details of the scam change: gold, crypto, romance, emergency loans, but the emotional blueprint is always the same. Don't let someone you love become a museum of regret like I was. Let my $250,000 mistake be your free lesson. Protect your heart, protect your people, share the warning. With a gardener's hope, Eleanor. P.S. If you or someone you know is being targeted, you are not alone. Reach out, talk to a trusted family member, your bank, or contact the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center IC3 or the Federal Trade Commission FTC. Silence is the scammer's greatest ally. Your voice is your greatest defense.